Thank you for joining us for the first in our new series, Wicked Problems in a Complex World. I'm thrilled to be bringing this series to you, and I'd like to thank the Newnham JCR and MCR and Sarah Carthew, our Development Director, for their involvement in making this new series of events possible. For those of you unfamiliar with the use of the term wicked in this context, which I certainly was, a wicked problem is a problem that is difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory and changing requirements that are often difficult to recognise. The use of the term wicked here has come to denote resistance to resolution rather than evil. So it's from this definition of wicked that we've defined this new series of events. And indeed, it is around addressing such problems that many of our alumni and academics are making their impact globally through their research, experience and expertise. And in this new academic year, we'll be looking at problems such as COVID-19, the aftermath of the US elections and Brexit. So this evening, the question is, can a crisis shake up systems for good? Does COVID-19 and its intersection with the Black Lives Matter movement offer us a chance to rethink our current economic, social and political systems? Can crises provide new imaginations of different futures? And I'm really grateful, given that everything else that is going on in Parliament this evening, that Dr. Rupa Hook MP, a Newnham alumna, has agreed to be with us here this evening and kick us off with this thorny question. Rupa came to Newnham in 1990, where she read social and political sciences and law. Following on from that, she completed a doctorate at the University of East London and has worked as a lecturer at Manchester University, where she held a Leverhulme Trust Fellowship, and as a senior lecturer in sociology at Kingston University. In 2015, she was elected as the Labour Member of Parliament for Ealing Central and Acton. She currently sits on the Committee on the Future Relationship with the European Union and recently became one of the group of senior members of Parliament who are part of the panel of chairs and can chair debates in Westminster Hall. This means, and she will do it much better than I, that she is one of the very few people authorised to say, as many as say aye, and as of the contrary, no.
Order, order!
There you go, you heard it here. Rupa, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I know the response to this event has been great, with students, alumni, staff and academics signing up to join us from around the world. So Rupa is going to speak to us, and then she's kindly agreed to take some questions at the end. So if you have questions you want to add in, please put them in the question and answer, and I will select some questions for her to answer. So Rupa, over to you.
Thanks very much, Alison, for such a warm welcome, and good to see you in real life last week. I was actually doing a thing at the Cambridge Union Society on Thursday night. I don't know if anyone who's here today saw that. Some of the same themes, but this is a much bigger, meaty question, overarching question. How can a crisis shake up systems for good? Or can a crisis shake up systems for good? And obviously we live under the umbrella of coronavirus. So this picture, I was a lecturer for many, many years, from 1998 until my election in 2015. So once a lecturer, always a lecturer. I have a PowerPoint for you today. And yeah, just this first picture sort of shows the global reach and kind of some of the themes I wanted to, oh, hang on, how did it go down? Okay, I've already, next. Yes, here we go. So kind of I want if there's a sort of order of this, I wanted to talk about the situation we're in now, the crossroads we're in, and then what the role of an MP is in the middle of all this. Because I mean, I didn't really know what an MP does. I'm still finding out every day, I guess. So sort of what opportunities are there to influence things if you're a backbench Labour MP, as I am? So that kind of mixes with democracy in the age of the virus. And then we will address the whole Black Lives Matter movement. You cannot fail to have noticed from the killing of George Floyd, the reverberations all around the world of that. And I'll look at other marginalised minorities as well. And then we'll finish up by addressing, you know, is there a new normal? It's often said we can't go back to normal after all this. We can't go back to what we had And this phrase "build back better" is often said, isn't it? So sort of that's my rough kind of order. So I mean, look, a word that we'd never even heard of a year ago. In fact, we were the general election of December 2019 had just been announced, and nobody had heard of the word coronavirus. And it's often said that 10 years of decisions had to be made in mere days at the beginning for people like local authorities, for central government. And it really has touched every aspect of our lives. So what began as a health crisis, global pandemic, then became an economic crisis. Economists are always going on about whether we will have a V-shaped recession, an L-shaped recession, a W-shaped recession. It looks like certainly we're facing twin peaks of infections and death rates. And, you know, it was Harold Wilson, a Labour Prime Minister in the 60s and 70s, who said a week is a long time in politics. Well, a week is an eternity in coronavirus. Just think of the situation we have today compared to what there was before the weekend. We know that we're heading for a national month-long lockdown, you know, right off pretty much the month of November after Thursday. It's not going to happen. So things change literally half hourly, and it's kind of paradoxical that things like isolation has brought communities together. Certainly at the height of it, we kept hearing of all these great community initiatives, but there are some questions there about sort of the role of the state as well. Food banks are all very good, but should that be something that the government is providing? I mean, right now, as I speak, I actually just asked Boris Johnson a question in the chamber. Then I'm in my office in the House of Commons, and there's going to be a general debate on COVID tonight. And general is good, but we also need specificity. We need solutions, and it does feel like sort of at the beginning it was just something for, because what we do is we can pose questions to ministers, not only PMQs, which is the very heard of one, but every department has ministerial questions, and sort of everything I've said, I think, since March has had coronavirus or COVID somehow, somewhere in it, because it does touch every aspect of all our lives. So, I mean, what does an MP do in all this? This is actually a picture of the 2015 election trail. That's my son, who's now 16, and that's, anyone know who that is on the left? Oh, sorry, it's not one of those where I can hear what people are saying. Ooh, okay, some stuff in the chat box. Okay, it's actually Eddie Izzard, if you know who that is. So it's sometimes an out-of-body experience doing the kind of job I do. And I have to say that in my case, it was not a Labour seat. I inherited the home seat that I grew up in 1992. My first ever vote was in Cambridge, because that was considered a more marginal seat. In fact, the seat was won by Labour by targeted votes. I always thought that the Tories did that election in the holidays on purpose, because a lot of people were in this, not in their student seat where it would have made a difference in Leeds and Bristol, lots of marginal seats in those areas in those days, but they were in their sort of safe Tory shire place. In my case, it was the old Ealing Acton seat, so George Young was the MP. So I elected to have my first vote by post in Cambridge in '92 rather than in person in Ealing, and we had a very targeted operation and ended up winning the seat, coming from third to first. And sort of it kind of repeated for myself in 2015. It was a Conservative seat. It had an incumbent woman MP by then, and they were looking for a Labour candidate to oppose her. I thought, I'll take her, I can do this, and ended up winning. So yeah, in the 2015, we had the Eddie Izzard come on the celebrity trail with us. I mean, and again, this picture would be unimaginable now. There's loads of people around. It was in a Ealing Broadway shopping centre. We see high streets being hollowed out. Some of the stuff I wrote about as an academic was actually two things: youth culture, number one. So I think my first book is in the Newnham Library. I think we got it in for them there. So youth culture and also suburbia. So these things, I often feel like I'm in some big sort of experiment for both of those as an MP. So hang on, next is, how do you do? Yes, there we go. So yeah, everyone knows what Prime Minister's questions looks like. It's kind of theatre, and it's only a small percentage of what MPs do. So that's half an hour on a Wednesday. As I say, actually, this is David Cameron. And from that angle, you could see he was actually having an increasing bald spot. You could see certainly from the gallery above. But that was the first question I think I ever asked him in 2015. We've had 2 other Prime Ministers since then. And that's kind of what it looks like from our point of view as an MP. As I say, it is a completely out-of-body experience sometimes to be there in a nice way, but at the same time, I kind of always feel you shouldn't take it too much for granted. You should have a bit of a distance with the House of Commons. It's not an ordinary workplace at all. And if you start taking it for granted, you become part of the problem thing. And I could go on the amount of that I've not, you know, if your face doesn't fit, then you get challenged, which I've had. Oh, where do you think you're going? That kind of thing. And I've had to show my House of Commons pass and say I am totally entitled to be here. But again, how has the virus changed Parliament? That kind of scene of all of us in there together, unimaginable now. It's sort of 4 a pew, every other pew. Okay, then we don't quite sing in there, but that's the arrangement. It is an ecclesiastical type of building. So with social distancing, that I didn't even know that picture was being taken, but it was by the House of Commons photographer. So it's a very different type of chamber. And people have said this makes for a more serious politics, because in the old, as it was rebuilt after the war, and Winston Churchill didn't want it to accommodate all the 650 MPs, so it only takes 420. So he deliberately kept it that size so the cosy atmosphere could be there. So there are people in the gangways, people everywhere, a lot of shouting, and this is why Sir Keir Starmer has apparently laid blows on Boris Johnson, because in that glacial courtroom atmosphere, he's able to do it without being drowned out by Johnson's own men, which was the old way of doing it. But I mean, again, this does show what the modern workplace is going to be like, because it's Parliament for MPs only at the moment. So, I mean, I employ 4 staff with my staff budget. I've not seen them since March. In fact, one of them has been appointed and started remotely. So, and again, there's a kind of proxy system of voting, and it is possible to ask questions by a virtual system, but it's made a 2-tier system, because to do debates and the real stuff, you have to be there in person, which is not right, that if you're someone who's young and fit and healthy, you can participate in everything, and it's a bit more limited if you're not. And this is all Jacob Rees-Mogg's idea of setting an example to the public. The question I asked just now was actually, if we're being, you know, why a church is not allowed to turn up when they've taken exactly the same measures as we have. I didn't get a very satisfactory answer. And we know that certain workplaces, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Schroders, I think, who are the other ones? Google, those kind of people are saying that they're not going to ever compel their staff to turn up. People have seen that renting loads and loads of real estate in a city centre, it doesn't necessarily make their workforce happier if it's more efficient for them to have their desk time at home. And so at the moment I am coming in when there are 3-line width votes and things, but not coming in every day. And as I say, my staff, I've not seen most of them since March. Okay, I mean, what kind of campaigns can you achieve as a backbench MP? I just put 4 there, just as an example of the kind of thing I have done historically. So the first question I had to David Cameron, which is the one the picture was of, was about a constituent who'd written in, a 6th former, who was doing A-level music. Out of the 70 composers she studied, again, it's not one that I can hear what the answers are. You could put it in the chat. How many of those were women in 2015? Any inkling? 70 composers, how many were women? Hang on, has anyone put it in there? We're still stuck stubbornly on 4 comments. Anyone venture a guess?
Oh no, we've got a couple of
1,
answers coming in now.
10. Okay, 1 and 10. It was 0, I hate to say. So I pointed this out to David Cameron and the e-petition that this sixth former had made and said, can he sort it out? And while he's there, would he tell us, is he a feminist? In fact, I said, would he congratulate my constituent? She was called Ellie. And because it was mixed with a question about a little kid, he had to say, I congratulate the honourable lady as constituent and herself for all the good work they're doing. So I was able to press release that as Conservative Prime Minister praises Labour MP. And then he said, and if being a feminist means equality for women, well, a third of my cabinet are, so I must be. Which, duh, you know, you don't have to be a statistician to know that 30, 70, really? Anyway, after a while, they did change the music syllabus and women are on there. Similar thing I had in my first year with the A-level politics syllabus. They were going to get rid of feminism. So I held, and I've got one of these this week actually, an end of day debate where you're face to face with a minister. There's pretty much only 2 people in there and you pose a series of questions to them. So they U-turned on that. For a while, I was a shadow Home Affairs minister. So a lot of the legislation on money laundering, on ill-gotten gains of sort of foreign investors buying up property under shell companies, I was the person who took that legislation through for Labour. And at the time, they opposed all our amendments, but we got them through later when the political climate changed, sort of thing. So that's an interesting thing. I've asked a lot on the self-employed. So these last 3 are COVID ones, actually. So we know that there have been furlough schemes. Unprecedented things have happened. State subsidies all over the shop. The magic money tree clearly has been located. But the self-employed have been sort of falling through the holes of the safety net. Many, 3 million people have had nothing since March. And I know from my own constituency casework and from being on all party parliamentary groups, APPGs with them, there are some really heartbreaking stories. And people, when it's not their own fault, freelancers in the arts have not got the latest arts grant because that went to buildings, not people. I've got a costumier of Asian weddings. Weddings, they were massively restricted, so that was crippling her. Now they've stopped. So all sorts of category, people from the travel industry that pretty much is all grounded, they have got nothing. And so I've asked a lot of questions on behalf of them. Vitamin D, we have no vaccine in sight, but it is a part of the armory that in countries where they have high levels of it, there's been very few infections and deaths. So there is a bit of a U-turn on the way about that one. That one is something I teamed up with David Davis MP. So, he's a Tory grandee Brexiteer. I'm a independent-minded Labour person, so quite different and massive Remainiac. But between us, we had a joint campaign and it looks like we've forced a government U-turn because at the beginning, when I started asking questions, they were saying there's no causal link. And then the last one is around abortion clinics and reproductive rights for women, buffer zones around abortion clinics. I've got one in my seat where there was a 23-year-long protest where women could not get in the door of this building, even women staff, because there was always a constant barrage of quite gruesome fetus dolls and things. I mean, no other medical procedure you'd be subject to that. You can have it in anonymity. And there's some movement on that. I'm hopeful that may happen. So, from a backbench Labour position, there are bits and pieces you can do. Next. And then, I draw inspiration from what I see just locally walking around. As I say, I represent my home seat, which is very rare. Other people on the hunt for a seat. I was just an academic who accidentally became a politician. But this is just two houses, a couple of streets ago yesterday, Black Lives Matter posters. And these are sort of, people not of that pigmentation. But this is good. And you see it of people of every type. So it's united, all sorts of people. So this is in a sort of she middle class neighbourhood. And then the other one, bollards to LTNs. I'll say a little bit about low traffic neighbourhoods in a bit. Very controversial policy all over London. So again, the debate I've got on Wednesday is about low traffic neighbourhoods and coronavirus emergency travel and transport measures. And there's this sense that the Black Lives Matter movement has been a brilliant thing for bringing these issues to the fore that were simmering injustices for many hundreds of years. But at the same time, there's this sense that some people are using coronavirus to, and there's the whole civil liberties argument about the lockdown. Tory MPs were making it in the chamber just now, that the Coronavirus Act gives very draconian powers for government to do things to us that have never been done in peacetime conditions. And the bollards to LTNs, low traffic neighbourhoods, is a bit of that, which I'll go into more. Other opportunities backbench MPs have, this is what a select committee used to look like pre-COVID. This is what it looks like now. So again, I'm on the Brexit committee. Alison, who's got a background in Europe as well, knows a lot about this subject. There's Michel Barnier in the top left, Hilary Benn, who's actually the former Ealing councillor and a constituent of mine. So as a London MP, I now represent 6 MPs, not including myself, people that have their London home in Ealing, Acton, and a bit of Chiswick I have too. It's not in the title. So yeah, I mean, again, this whole new ways of doing things, I'd never done any video conferencing or even Skype until April, and now it's a daily thing. I had 3 back-to-back Skypes this morning. Sorry, not Skypes, what were they? Teams and the other one, Zoom. So yeah, it has changed the way we conduct our business. And, you know, some of the other bits and pieces, oh, hang on. Actually, yeah, this is the Evening Standard gossip column. So it's an odd job in that everything you do is televised and noticed. So I think I noticed it early on when I had a Hessian bag that had the word Ealing Broadway on it and took it into the chamber, and the gossip columnist noticed that and said, yeah, this Rupa Hunt going around with this big Ealing Broadway bag. So this was to Michael Gove, who couldn't answer any of my questions on financial passporting. I represent a lot of people who work in the city. And I mean, something interesting that's happened as a result of coronavirus actually is we've been in calls with ministers, many more of those than we'd have ever had as normal backbench MPs before all this. So it's been possible to make, as I say, cross-party alliances, as I've done with David Davis, and even on buffer zones with Bernard Jenkin. So these sort of odd diametrically opposed, so Sir Bernard Jenkin, again, he's an Essex MP, big leaver, but good on women's reproductive rights. So with David Davis, I've been in to see Matt Hancock. Sorry, it sounds a bit like I'm name dropping. With Bernard Jenkin, I've seen Priti Patel. So sometimes those people can help with access. And ultimately, I think most politicians just want a better world, but we have different approaches of how we think that should be done. So, yeah, so this is the Evening Standard noticing that Michael Gove was name dropping Rag and Bone Man in his thing because he was showing off. So then I name dropped M&M. And I said, I think, Minister, there's a lot of cleaning out my closet still to be done about this Brexit deal. And Brexit did sort of colour most of my parliamentary life, but now it feels almost forgotten, which is why I went on that committee. So, as well as the Evening Standard, which is a London evening newspaper, the Ealing Gazette, part of your job as an MP, things get amplified through different media. Suspicious package is when actually I had an Islamophobic epistle sent to my office. There was a Killer Muslim Day letter being dropped, I think, around the North and Midlands through people's letterboxes. And so we had a version of it sent to this office here, but doused in a mystery substance. It was at the time of Novichok. And so the whole floor had to be cordoned off, people in hazmat suits. So this was pre-coronavirus, but people in those scary hazmat suits, and the person who touched it from my office had to go to hospital to be checked out, and I think basically have a deep clean. Every cloud, eh? Anyway, so that's and then this is a headline from earlier this year, and it's the Black Lives Matter protest that we had in Ealing. Actually, in between the two, you can see it's gone from being the Ealing Gazette with all the different bits of Ealing, West Ealing, Hanwell, Acton, Greenford, to the Gazette that covers suddenly Hammersmith, Kensington, Chelsea, Westminster. So that says something about the contraction of our local media. But I mean, I can't breathe. Those three words really, really poignant and moving, from the killing of Brother George, shall we say, 8 minutes, 47 seconds, suffocated to death, and the reverberations of something that happened in Minneapolis to Bristol, to Brussels. So, as I say, there's such a lot of sort of simmering discontent that came out of this moment, and the government felt like they were closing their ears to all of it. They boxed up the statue of Winston Churchill. That was their answer. And I feel they're trying to create a culture war out of this, that no one will attack Winston Churchill. I think there was even some stuff about Fawlty Towers. Nobody was ever, you know what I mean? I don't remember any marches about Fawlty Towers. But we know that that the fortunes of many of our cities were built on the back of Black lives of a colonial and racist past. So in Bristol, that statue of Edward Colston, the slaver, shipped 100,000 slaves to from Africa and the Caribbean. There was also the Cecil Rhodes controversy in Oxford. I think there was a Robert Milligan statue in East London that was removed, but it was a quite exhilarating moment. I mean, I know you should do these things through the proper channels and not just, chuck people off their pedestal. But for me, it was quite an exciting moment to see him chopped off in that way and then rolled into the same shores that the slave ships would have arrived. And I think it did mean a lot of things came to a head. And we've seen cities ablaze in the US. We've seen a president that should be healing, but panders to white supremacists. And it almost seems he's kind of enjoying that, treading the line, as well as George Floyd. There's also been Rodney King, Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, the list goes on. And I'm afraid we could construct, not as long because of different firearms rules in this country, an alternative list of Cynthia Jarrett, Cherry Gross, John Charles de Menezes, of people in accidental killings by our police here. So we shouldn't completely think that we're okay here and that it's all right, we're all right, Jack. Disparities, this says, because in the summer we know that the Public Health England report came out and showed that you're more likely to get it and you're more likely to die from coronavirus if you are BME. And I found myself doing a fair amount of interviews on this, and people were saying why. There are a range of factors. We know that those frontline people putting their necks on the line. I mean, it was quite noticeable when the first pictures of the doctors who died came out, wasn't it? And then we thought, oh, look at this. They all look a bit similar. So a lot of Black, Asian and other minority doctors. So at every level, to the hospital sweeper, those frontline jobs quite often done by people who are more exposed. I had a case of a constituent's father. I mean, those figures showed you're 4 times more likely to die if you're BME. And so the Doreen Lawrence report was launched at that point. It's just reported back last week. Baroness Lawrence, the mother of Stephen Lawrence. And I had a case of Ranjit Chandrapali drove a 92 bus to Ealing Hospital. You can hear that noise. I think it's not a vote. I'm okay. But my life is governed by that bell. I don't know if you can hear it. Yeah, so he did a daily route to the hospital. At the time, there was no PPE, there was no deep cleaning. So this vehicle was like a mobile Petri dish every day. and he ended up dying in the same hospital that his route connected. His daughter started a campaign, and I raised it in Parliament. I wrote to Boris Johnson that those people who gave their lives, Belly Majinga also we heard of, ticket officer at Victoria Station, should receive death in service benefits, and there should be basic PPE. I mean, again, this has been such a long-running virus that at the beginning PPE was meant to be only for clinicians. Now being masked up is just part of daily life for all of us. So yeah, I mean, these disparities, it was around then actually that the vitamin D argument came up, because it was claimed, oh, these ethnic people, they were all low in vitamin D. But it's an odd nutrient, stroke bordering on the hormone really, because it is when the UV rays hit the skin that it's produced. So if you've got darker skin, or if you're wearing sunblock, it doesn't work as much. Turns out that everyone in this country is deficient in it. So in Scotland, they're actually prescribing it now, especially for people who are shielding. When people were indoors, it wasn't happening. It unusually doesn't come much through food. So yeah, I mean, we've seen a whole range of disparities, haven't we? North versus South. So the whole standoff between Andy Burnham and Boris Johnson. Serco Track and Trace, we know, is not functioning properly. We know that there's intergenerational disparities too. So traditionally, people always think that the next generation will do better than themselves, that you'll outdo your parents. And in some ways, maybe we have with technology. But in terms of material wealth and properties, property ownership, that kind of thing, it's getting pretty impossible for someone in London on a traditional 3.5 size income multiple. And I remember that I did a speech on this early on, and the Evening Standard used the headline, because I said that people aged in their 30s are in house shares, and there's a fridge with a lock on it, and or not a lock on it, and they're terrified that their bits of the fridge will be nicked. And it was MP Lord's the Who Stole My Cheese generation. So again, these disparities, different ones. Let's change the picture. This is a Black Lives Matter, I don't know what that was, rally in Acton. So socially distanced under some trees. I think the mic had a sort of plastic sheen on it, and it was changed for every person in case. And we took the obligatory knee for 8 minutes, 47 seconds, which is a heck of a long time. I can't breathe. Again, those final words. And then we had one in Acton and Ealing. In fact, this is the Ealing one, which was earlier. That was a bigger one. And, it did strike me. I felt, gosh, this is actually quite white. I represent a very multicultural area, and demographers say it's multi-everything. It's not one particular ethnicity. It's always had a lot of Polish before the 2004 enlargement of the EU. So, I mean, I always went to school with people that were Polish, and I thought it was quite normal to go to Polish Saturday school, as they all did. Anyway, this is the Ealing one, but we also had the Acton one. So it has galvanised people everywhere, as far away as in Brussels, where the statue of King Leopold met this sort of reaction. And we know that people should atone for slavery and those bad old days. And, the old samosas and steel bands and saris, multiculturalism, again, from the 80s that I remember, it felt like a bit of a pat on the head that you're all right as long as you don't get too powerful or become an MP or you're some decorative thing in the corner. I'd like to think that we're getting beyond that now. And, I draw strength from the fact that Parliament looks more like a normal, it's looking more and more normal. It took only till 1987, so when I was well into being a teenager, that the first BME parliamentarians in living memory were elected, including Diane Abbott, whose picture is in the Newnham Library. Again, Black Lives Matter meetings sometimes happen this way. So this is one that we had last week. It was a Zoom. So we've all had to get used to this new way of doing and being. I think that's me in the middle there, somewhere on top of the bookshelves person, and the Black Lives Matter salute or fist is in the middle of it. And I've learnt a lot about identity politics from listening to people in these. I mean, it often feels that the pace of change is glacial. But yeah, so the new way of doing things, I'd never said you need to unmute yourself, as I say, until about April. And now it's many times a day I hear that said to me, or I say it to them, all the stuff about what background should you have behind you. If we're talking disparities, there's a lot of research that shows that women have been hardest hit by COVID for reasons of, juggling everything, homeschooling as well. Women do the brunt of childcare. As a parent myself, I know this. And these memorable minutes of TV journalists, so even they're working from home now. I think I last went into a studio in March. I've done a lot of these Sky and stuff via, from down the line since then. So the top one was the foreign correspondent whose son came in saying, "Can I have a biscuit?" And then the one on the right was, I think, an eminent professor of epidemiology, although to some extent we are all epidemiologists now, who had a daughter come in and ask for, was rearranging unicorns on the shelf. So, I mean, again, but there is also research that shows that countries that have been run by women have done better in all this than countries run by men. And we've got two very bombastic leaders on both sides of the old pond in Trump and Johnson. But we've seen in Taiwan, in Germany, in New Zealand as well, they've done a lot better out of it. And so maybe calm, rational female leadership is what's needed in a crisis like this. We've had quite a few new sort of words we've all had to learn in recent years, haven't we? I mean, I think you can read those faster than I can read them out. There's other ones: lockdown, quarantine, social distancing, which should maybe be, actual physical distancing, herd immunity, trolling, all those kind of things. And, we know that certain things have increased. So I think it's cycling, fishing, wife beating, I guess, domestic violence, mental health issues, those sort of things. So, and sometimes these things are interlinked. So when the schools were closed, schools are often a way that the police reporting of domestic violence can take place. So the domestic violence figures that we do know there were may be lower than the actual figure. Again, I talked about generational disparity. We saw the student marches over the A-level results. I don't know if anyone here was involved in those. I've got a son actually who did or didn't do the GCSEs. They were the centre assessed grades. And I think, again, this is one of the many government U-turns. There's been another one, the fact we're having a lockdown when he was so adamant that we wouldn't. So I've lost count of all these U-turns now. But the algorithm, the rise of the algorithm that is now deciding everything, the new Planning Act is also deciding things about algorithms. Oh, sorry, how do you go back? Okay, so this says, Trumpification. So again, populism is something that we've seen on the rise in Hungary, in Poland, where rather disturbingly, abortion is all but banned, I think, at the moment, which just seems very regressive and backward. People may need it for reasons of fatal fetal abnormality or rape or anything. It just beggars belief. So, I mean, we saw the lingering effect of the financial crisis. I think the recession of all recessions that's going to hit us this time is going to dwarf that. It's going to make that look like a sort of Tea Party. Sorry, not in the Tea Party movement sense. And globalization, oddly, is something that I mean, this was a fact checked by The Sun that this math is not quite right, because there have been uneven rates all over the place. But it does look like globalization, which for many decades we thought, certainly since the 90s, is something inevitable with European integration. Now we're leaving the EU, we have left, in fact. And if there was ever a time when global interlinked thinking would have been useful, it would have been now. But instead, everyone's retreated into their own sort of enclaves to try and find the virus or whatever. So I think, you know, and we've heard all these crazy bombastic claims of our leaders. I think Trump said by April it will miraculously go away. Boris Johnson said it will be over by Christmas. Mistakes have been made. There was pandemic planning in this country, Operation Cygnus, that identified many areas that we needed to act on. Instead, public health funding was massively cut back. Now Public Health England is being abolished. I think the son of Public Health England will go to Dido Harding. It does feel like, you know, it's jobs for the boys quite a lot. So yeah, the way Trump calls coronavirus the Chinese virus as well is sort of very disturbing. So I see a sort of Trumpification everywhere, worryingly. That's a blank one. Hang on, what's the one after that? Yeah, and then there's some things that haven't gone away. So we were promised at the general election that there was an oven-ready deal. Just needed, actually, was it a microwave meal? I think someone's a bit confused here. A microwave and an oven are two different things. But anyway, sling it in the microwave. So it's a ready meal. Okay, so it's reheated leftovers. But instead, we now know fuel shortages, food and medicine shortages, 3-month meltdown at the ports. Kent will be a lorry park. Hard border in Ireland, all these things, they said there would be friction-free trade, not happened. You know, maybe it's that in real life. So, you know, Brexit hasn't gone away. And these 3-word slogans are just dangerous. Get Brexit done, 4 more years, lock her up. They're just sort of not, you know, these are complex questions. It's a multifaceted thing. And I feel that political accountability is sort of being jettisoned in some of this. So, as I say, the Coronavirus Act gives the state enormous powers to interfere in our lives with things they've never done before. And there's other big companies that also, it feels like, are using coronavirus while the eyes of the world are diverted by the pandemic to do bad stuff. BT and BA, British Airways, the world's favourite airline, was planning a restructure. This is the moment to do it while no one's noticing. Again, the government not extending the transition period, thinking everything will be mixed up in coronavirus, nobody will notice those convulsions. So my killer conclusion, so is this a reset? Is this the moment where we build back better? I don't know if you remember, probably everyone here is way too young to remember the old Coke advert, I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. That's what it's been touted, that that's where we're going, that there'll be a, you know, much nicer society, politics, economics, the other side of it. And look, if you look at some of the things that have happened, who'd have thought in this country we'd have 80% of wages of people taxpayer funded, that there'd be financial support packages, real action to tackle homelessness. Hotels were turned over at the height of it for rough sleepers. You know, Marcus Rashford was honoured. It almost, because of his free school meals campaign, that in the holidays, people who are recipient of those should carry on. So, you know, many things happened that were actually in our manifesto, short of free broadband. Nationalising railways, that's something else that's happened. But, you know, I think if there is a moment to reset, reconfigure, now could be it. Because, you know, we have had growing inequality. After the 2008 crash, it's no accident that the phrase capitalism in crisis and the 99%, those started percolating. So, you know, we've had Black Death, we've had bubonic plague, empires have fallen before. So, you know, if tomorrow's result shows that a Biden win, I'm kind of optimistic, although naturally pessimistic as well as a Labour person who's known many election defeats. But I mean, it does feel that Boris Johnson is someone who doesn't really have any particular ideology apart from himself. So, you know, now could be the time, and people will get used to this kind of thing. If another recession comes along, this sort of state financial stimulus people will expect. This is just low traffic neighbourhoods. I don't know if that's just a bit confusing on top of all this. Just this shows that sometimes green policy. So the main thing, people say we should build back sustainably and build a more resilient economy. But then we've also seen, this is the logic behind a low traffic neighbourhood, that if you have lots of vehicles, air pollution, I can't breathe, remember, is going to get worse. We want a carbon neutral economy by 2030. We've only got one planet. There's a climate emergency. There's an obesity crisis. So what do? You shut residential roads to cars and you make them cycling and walking only. That's the dream of it. And as I say, in Ealing, lots of them being introduced, but then lots of opposition too, because people like their metal boxes, and also because it's an incursion of freedom of movement, and it's the Coronavirus Act, again, our friend. So you find these bollards and planters being placed, closing every side street off to put people on the main roads, being vandalised, and you find marches. Anyway, that's just because it's in my inbox. So yeah, I don't know where it all goes. I'm no mystic Meg, but I am optimistic, and I do hope that, you know, I've lived through many crises. Even as an MP, I've seen the death of my friend and colleague Jo Cox, Brexit, the stalemate that we had for 3 years over that. And every time people say, you know, we've got to build back better this time. And that even in itself is a phrase that both Biden, Jacinta Ardern and Boris Johnson have all used. So it's kind of a malleable, vague thing, but I think specific things we could do better. I'd like to see more of them, and I'm optimistic. And I should have a killer conclusion, but I think I've gone way over, so I'm going to finish there.
Rupa, thank you so much. Would you just want to stop sharing your screen, and then
let's do that.
Slightly more large.
Hang on, stop share. Go away. Right, okay.
Super. And Katie is going to bring in Lucci and Renee from the JCR and NCR who are going to ask questions. But I am just, while we're waiting for that, just going to read out one comment that someone was given, which is just to thank you so much for taking the time to show us what's going on. We're really pleased that you can get your points on the agenda. And whereas sometimes one can get the impression it's more or less hopeless trying to move things forward, you're giving us hope. Because you're talking about a lot of things that concern us and our families, and we're just, you know, amazed at all you do, staying strong, particularly when you've got things like unidentified substance being posted. So a huge thank you from someone who is speaking on behalf of all of us. But we've now got Lucci and Renee on. I don't know if they can put their videos on so that's right. So Lucci, you managed to put your video on first. So Lucci, would you like to ask your question, please?
Hi, thank you for speaking. It's been really insightful. My name's Lucci. I'm a second year HSPS student, obviously at Newnham. So
that's the new STS, right?
Yes, yeah. So recently we can see the rise of young politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the US and Nadia Whittome in the UK, both in some ways emerging as a response to the moving of confrontational right-wing politics into the mainstream. As we have also witnessed the resistance they have faced both from within their parties and from outside, as well as the abuse more established politicians like yourself and Diane Abbott have faced, do you think there's real space and opportunity for young women of colour as politicians? And what advice would you give aspiring politicians, given your own experiences? Thank you.
Brilliant. Are we taking them one by one or in threes?
Yes, please, because we've not got that long.
Okay.
So I want to. That's a really good question, Lucci. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Lucci. I would say just do it. I would say join the Labour Party. Other alternatives are available, I understand. And I mean, I'd say don't be deterred by these fossilised gargoyle people that are what an MP is supposed to look like. I mean, my colleague Dawn Butler, she's got braids. I mean, I have a sort of conventional hairstyle nowadays, I guess. although not when I was at Newnham. But anyway, the point is, she was once told this whole building reeks of privilege. And I think the more normal people who are in there who can sort of shake that up, the better. Because then, you know, I might not look like what an MP looks like, but my idea is to change what an MP is. And that should be the same for all of you. So Dawn Butler, they're a whole, when you come in here and, you know, maybe we could organise a trip sometime when it's all back to normal for JCR members. It might be fun. I could show you around. Very easy for me to do that. At the moment, there's a ban on visitors, but that won't be forever. Anyway, there are whole corridors that are members only and whole other bits for the public. So even when I was, first of all, voting, I used to think, hang on, I know my way out the building. I've been in here for meetings. It's there, isn't it? But then everyone's going another way, and that's an MPs only corridor. So Dawn Butler was in an MPs only lift. And a male Conservative MP, white Conservative at the time, said, this isn't for cleaners, you know. And, you know, that kind of thing is absolutely galling. And as I say, I get challenged. I've got more grey hair now. I mean, it's only been 5 years, 3 elections. But yeah, I also have got challenged before. I've probably been stopped and searched more within the building. But no, Nadia is much loved. She's baby of the house. She's 28 years old, I think. No, 23 years old, is it? So she, I mean, from within, I think our party thinks she's a complete star. She's brilliant. She's a good colleague, a good friend. And again, we can learn a lot. I think we need a parliament that reflects society. So if it is only one type of person, you know, and it looks very Oxbridgey when you walk around, and you can imagine people, some people feel very at home with the Gothic sort of whatever arches and blah, blah, blah. It feels very Oxbridgey, feels probably like their school and like their home. And their name is Jacob Rees-Mogg, and then it's just a replication thing. So I'd say, you know, don't be deterred, just do it.
Thank you very much. Renee, your question.
Hi, Rupa. Nice to see you again. I've worked at Ealing Law Centre, and I think I interviewed with you once. So my question is, during COVID, we've had the Black Lives Matter movement, which has helped unite communities around the world in tackling racism towards Black people. Given the example of collective action given by this movement on how we can unite effectively and decisively against racism, do you think this suspension of Jeremy Corbyn is sufficient, and what more could Labour do during COVID to unite its party members and constituents to tackle anti-Semitism within the party in the same way as this movement? Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. Yes, very hot potato. I mean, look, the Labour Party has accepted the HRC recommendations in full. It's a shameful thing that a historically anti-racist party has been found in breach of the law by a statutory body that originally, in its predecessor, when it was the EOC, it was 2 different things that merged. But yeah, they were all set up by Labour governments, actually, by Tony Blair in its current form. I mean, it's just massively disappointing that Jeremy Corbyn appeared to downplay it. I think he said some good stuff as well, but then by saying basically it's been exaggerated because there's a lot of pain and hurt, which that did not acknowledge. So I think, you know, the party, and it was, I think, a party official, not actually Keir Starmer, had really no choice, that he pretty much expelled himself. But I'm hoping there's a path back if he atones or whatever. I mean, it's been an embarrassing stain for too long, but, you know, because we're all able to say as a woman, as a BME person, if people aren't able to say in a Labour Party meeting as a Jewish person, that's not a party any of us wants to be in. So, I mean, I don't know what will happen. Due process has to be done. I guess there's some steps. But yeah, it's just been a horrible episode in the Labour Party's history, and I'm pleased that Keir Starmer has been so decisive and strong on this. Are you from Ealing, Renee?
I lived there for a while, but I work with Ealing Law Centre, so I think I've known
yes.
Dad a little bit.
Brilliant. Okay, they're really good people. Love them. Yeah.
Love them. Yeah.
Right, I think, thank you very much. You've got time for 1 or 2 more questions, so I'm struggling a bit because there's so many to come in.
Or if you want, do them as one go, Alison, and then I'll just do it at the end or whatever. Anyway, you know how to do.
So I thought one which we haven't, some of them are things you actually touched on the way through. 2 which I think are a bit linked are one which is around, is parliamentary supremacy in the UK under threat like never before, and what can we do about it? And a linked one there, which comes more from the US, is a question about people saying, how can you fight armed militias with op-eds, i.e. editorial, so how do you fight violence with non-violence? Any thoughts on those two? Hang on, you're muted again.
Sorry, it was me who did that, was it? Yeah, I mean, violence with non-violence. I do think the rise of social media has changed everything, actually, because maybe the two are linked. It creates a culture of immediacy. So putting an X in a box every 5 years just seems a very, very slow way of doing things. So we're all, we have Change UK petitions come into our inboxes. Some people, I have to say, actually have ticked a box where it says every campaign. So when you meet them in the street and you say, oh, I sent you back your email about so-and-so, they don't even quite realise they did subscribe to that particular campaign, but they're mass email things that can spam an MP. I mean, I know Conservative MPs who say they completely ignore all of them. They're all rubbish. But I think, okay, so is parliamentary supremacy under threat? I think just the slowness of it all is making it look very stultified, and there's obviously reforms that could be done. For the pandemic, we actually had virtual voting for a while, but very short-lived. Jacob Rees-Mogg wants us to set an example. So partly what I was pointing out in my question to Johnson today is we're being made to turn up, and it's no less COVID secure than some of these other places that apparently have got benefits for mental health, and in the case of the churches spiritually. So yeah, is it under threat? I mean, I guess you'd have to have a proper revolution to overturn it. On the violence thing, I think in America, it was Obama who got into trouble for saying they cling to their God and cling to their guns. I'm afraid on the guns bit, there is something in that, isn't there? Because it's just considered not normal to go to a supermarket and buy a killing machine. And it's just shocking that in America, in teacher training, firearms drills is part of it. They all know how to get down on the floor. I actually was meant to be there this week as an election observer, but because of coronavirus and the logistical things of quarantine, it didn't happen. But yeah, I do worry for American democracy. You've got a president who looks like he doesn't want to relinquish power if he loses. And if ever there was an election that needed observing, I think it was this one. But yeah, I think they just need to shake up their gun laws. I think Obama did try, but was pilloried for it. Yeah, it's difficult to compare those two things, but yeah.
I worked with an American ambassador once who said if the right to bear arms was the arms that had been around at the time of the American Constitution, it would be a lot less worrying. but I agree. I mean, in general, it's just not a good way to do things. Rupa, I'm really grateful to you. We promised we'd let you go at 7. I know from my previous life just how busy MPs are and how many things you will have turned down in your diary in order to be able to give us this time. So I really want to make sure you leave, though we're hoping that now we've seen you a couple of times, we'll be able to reconnect and particularly have you back to see the students in real life when we're able to do things in real life. But I think what you have shown us, and that's come in with some of the questions too, is campaigning on issues which may appear to some people, things like vitamin D or what sort of music people are listening to. And I wonder if you'd ask that question as to how many of those 70 were composers of colour. You might have ended up with a very low answer as well. But all of these are things that are creating the sort of culture which are changing things. And I find that so encouraging, because sometimes it's easy to think, and one or two people have said, what about local authorities, people working away, worker bees there, somebody working, I think, for disabled children. But it is often those things in community, and then people like you picking them up and bringing them to people of attention, and using modern media techniques, using video conferencing, working in different ways to really try and bring those changes about. So thank you. On a day when a lot of us have spent a lot of time thinking about COVID restrictions, to have you lift our eyes a bit and think, right, come on, what changes can we make? It's been really encouraging for me, and I'm sure to everybody else online. So
it's a pleasure.
With the webinar function, we can't really let you hear everybody clapping, but I think those of us on screen can clap.
Yeah, I've just seen all these 20 comments. Sorry about that. Never mind.
Don't worry, people wanted to hear from you. So we've had 110 participants at least, so that's fantastic. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Alucci. Thank you, Katie, behind the scenes, and Sarah too. And wishing everybody a very good evening.